Okay, you're good.
Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Keith.
Let's tell a little bit about ourselves.
Okay, we can do that.
So,
You start.
I'm a junior developer. I'm in high school. I'm an Angular developer, and I promise you I'm going to use this pointer a lot more than I should. So that's me. That's me.
This is going to be fun. Yeah.
The pointer.
And I am a, what's my title now? I'm a tech lead in DevOps UI for CollabNet. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I also do a decent amount of consulting on the side, and I'm now an co-organizer of NGHouston.
So this is our talk, just another Marble Monday, and it's completely 80s based, so get ready. So in this talk, we will discuss the benefits of unit testing, because I pity the fool who doesn't test. Discuss why marble testing is bad to the bone. Learn what exactly marbles are, and how to read a marble diagram.
Wow, I'm
And one of my
too much.
favorites, marble syntax.
All right. And we'll look into the difference between hot and cold observables. We will get into some example marble tests. And don't have that in the script. We're going to get into test scheduler. You'll understand a bit more about what that's about later. An 80s dance-off. It's going to be incredible, although we're skipping that today, so sorry. And then last but not least, we're going to be doing a quiz at the end. So have your mobile devices ready, because you're going to do it on your phones, all right?
So first off, why should we test?
That is a very valid question, Sam. Thanks for asking, and it has many answers. So just to name a few, improved code quality, reduced cost of development, rad code documentation, and confidence in your refactoring. So yes, rad. Like we said, 80s theme, so terminology. There's definitely a lot more reasons to test your applications, and I'd be happy to discuss them with anyone interested after the presentation's done today. All right, so alligator.io says that marble diagrams are a way to visually represent observables.
Here is a marble diagram. First, let's look at the lines. They show us the flow of time as indicated by the arrow on the right side. Secondly, we see the marbles, which represent values emitted by the observables. Next, we see the operator in the middle, which is multiplying every one of our values by 10. The bar at the end of the sequence represents completion. We will explain that a little bit more when we get into marble syntax.
I'm not sharing my screen. Sorry. Uno momento, por favor.
So this is our test run for ngComp, so you guys are our guinea pigs.
Yay!
Yay!
I get to see it in ngComp talk for free.
Yes. Also, that means that we would love feedback at the end. Get it?
Not yet. So let's see here. Share screen. Wow. Share. And whoa, that's crazy. As we present again, and we get our notes.
Thank you. That was our talk.
Yep.
Now you're presenting your notes.
And we take our notes off of the screen, if we can.
Totally just blew our cover.
Yeah. And we hit the button That makes it full screen again so it doesn't annoy me. And we hide, and we're back.
And we're back.
Yes.
Okay. Now we gotta get back to where we were. Sorry. Oh, no. Yep. Yep.
Mark completion.
Yeah.
Okay, and there we go.
Okay, so then we see the output line at the bottom, which is the same as the top. It represents the flow of time. Lastly, there's an X, which represents an error, if one is present. So before we get into marble testing, we have to know how to read them, the tests with the marbles. Every time I told someone I was speaking on marble testing at NGConf, the first reaction was, oh man, I tried to write one time and I couldn't understand what all the values, what all the little characters meant. So that is marble syntax. This is actually my favorite part, and I'm a dork, I know.
All right, so let's briefly discuss marble syntax. We're not going to go too deep into the syntax because it's really pretty straightforward and easy to understand. But we'll point out a few things about it. It's one of those things that I think is a little misunderstood, but once you get into it, it's not too bad. So dashes. Dashes represent a measure of time, usually 10 frames, or to tie that into an actual time increment, 10 milliseconds. Or actually, I guess it would be 100 milliseconds. Anyways, a pipe represents completion, just like we saw earlier on that diagram. And a hash represents the dreaded error.
I don't like finding those in my tests.
Yeah, me either. All right, next, so characters represent a variable that is emitting values in your observable. Parentheses indicate a synchronous grouping. So when you have multiple events in your stream that need to be processed synchronously, you can use the parentheses to group those events together. And lastly, the caret represents a subscription point. This is something that's only used in hot observables, which we will help you understand in a moment. And that moment is now, hot and cold observables. So this quote, I think, says a lot. Give you a moment to read it, rather than reading it to you. So I know there's a lot of information there, and we're going to get into explaining that to you right now.
So, in our own words, hot observables are creating values before the subscription is started. With cold observables, nothing happens until the subscription begins. A good example of a hot observable is mouse move events, like was mentioned in the quote on the previous slide. Because mouse moves are happening whether someone is listening or not, an example of a cold observable is an HTTP request. Nothing happens until someone subscribes to it.
Okay, now let's take a look at some examples of marble tests, and we'll show you how hot and cold observables are used in those tests.
Just a disclaimer, we will be using jasmine-marbles to write our tests. There are other options out there, but for us, this is our favorite. First, let's take a look at what we're going to test. This is the load dancers effect. If you don't know what NGRX effects do, they listen for actions to be dispatched, and after performing some side effect, they return a new action.
So what this effect is doing is listening for the load dancer's action to be dispatched. It then executes the get dancers function on the dancer service, and if successful, returns the load dancer's success action along with the array of dancers as the payload. If the request for the dancers is unsuccessful, it will return the load dancers fail action. Okay, so this is a test that would write against the dancers effect. As you can see, there are three basic sections to this test. First, we set up our payload data up at the top. Then we prepare our starting action and completion action. Like we mentioned in the previous slide, effects are basically looking for an action, and then they are returning an action at the end. And then we set our effects and tell the answer service what to return when the getDanswers function is executed.
So here we can see that we are declaring a hot observable to represent the dispatched action. This is because we are assuming that actions could already be getting dispatched before the test begins. The response and expected result are declared as cold observables because they will not emit any values before the test begins. You can also see here that we are using marble syntax to describe what these observables are doing. For the action that starts this process, after a 10-frame delay, the action is dispatched. Then, when the HTTP request is sent after another 10-frame delay, the array of dancers is emitted, and that observable stops emitting values. The expected result has two 10-frame delays before emitting the completion action. The reason for having two 10-frame delays is because both the starting action and the response has a 10-frame delay each, so the expected result is waiting on both of those to occur.
Now, the test for what happens if the HTTP request fails. The structure is very similar here. We start by preparing the payload data. In this case, it's just an error message. We then prepare our starting and completion actions and set up the effect itself before declaring what we expect the result to be.
That's a hell of an error message.
Epic fail.
Epic fail, yes, yes. So, all right, so the main difference here between this test and the previous test is the fact that the response here is not returning a value. It's instead throwing an error. The expected result still has a 2-frame delay here, though, before emitting the completion action. This is happening again because the previous steps in this process both have a 1-frame delay, or 1-frame delay each. So we still expect that the error does not come, or that the expected result does not come until after 2 10-frame delays.
Now let's get into a slightly more complicated scenario where we need to work with the scheduler that determines when values are emitted from an observable.
All right, so what if you're writing tests against functionality that has something to do with changing the schedule of how an observable is emitting values? A good example of this would be if you're using debounce in your functionality. Maybe you're doing something like suppressing the number of values that are emitted from an observable as a user is typing in some sort of search criteria.
So RxJS operators internally use the async scheduler to determine when they will emit values. So what we can do is use the getTestScheduler method that is provided by jasmine-marbles to grab the schedule and control it however we need.
Okay, before we get into the tests, let's take a look at the effect that we're going to be testing, like we did before. In this case, we will be testing the search effect. This effect starts with the dispatch of a search action. It then applies a debounce to suppress any values from being emitted for a period of time, and then searches for the dancers and returns a search success action. So as we test the search action, what we need to do is get a handle on the scheduler so that we can deal with the debounce and get it to do what we need to. So that happened? Okay. So once we have a handle on the test scheduler, and again, this is coming from the async operator or async functionality from within RxJS. Once we get a handle on that, we can overwrite it and return our new scheduler, where we're setting the delay to a more reasonable 30 frames. It's a lot easier to write a test against 30 frames rather than the 300 that we had before. I'll demonstrate that in a little bit here. Once we have that done, the structure of our test ends up being pretty much the same as the other ones that we looked at.
So one thing that I'll point out is that the expected result has a delay of 50 frames. This is because the starter action and the response each have a delay of 10 frames. And then there is an additional 30-frame delay for the debounce. Quiz time!
Everyone have their mobile devices ready?
Everybody get out our phones, and we are going to go back to, we're going to go over here with our mouse.
Yeah,
Okay.
So,
We're going to click quiz time.
oops. Hold on, do I need to actually
Go
do the
back to
presentation?
present, yeah. Then you're going to just press it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, oh my god, let's sign in again.
We're gonna go
Kahoot.it.
Kahoot got it. Try to tell us that part.
Oh, sorry.
This is the 80s dance off we were talking about.
Yeah, you can. You just put in a yeah. So the game pin is 6652778. Is anybody having a hard time finding it?
Yeah, if you need help, just raise your hand.
We're pretty tech savvy people.
I need a lot now.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Well,
is that about everybody?
No, it's not.
No, Kahoot.it. So you see right there, Kahoot.it, and then into the game pin.
this is kind of catchy now. Oh, for a second there, I thought someone logged in as me. That's a different kid. All right, Keith Perry, you're gonna win this. I can feel it.
And there's a sweet prize at the end. Just
Is there
FYI.
a prize?
Yeah, there's a prize.
Not today.
No, there's a prize.
There's a prize today.
There's a prize.
Pizza.
There's a prize. There's a prize.
NGHouston.
Okay, I think that's about it. Anybody else trying to get in? Okay.
You need help? You go to, you open your browser and go to Kahoot.it, and then what does it say?
You can do it on your laptop.
I didn't notice.
I got it.
Oh, you did?
Okay, are you ready, guys? You started.
I'm gonna check and see if he's good.
Okay, we're ready.
Yep.
Go.
All right,
Okay.
here comes the questions, guys.
What is the relationship between an observable and marbles? Marbles. Oh, where's my? Marbles represent observables. Observables watch for marbles to emit a value. Or marbles are hot and observables are cold.
Nice.
That was a
Nice.
tough one. Yeah, there's 20
That's
seconds.
pretty good percentage there. That's
Okay,
pretty good.
so let's go.
I like it.
Here. Okay. Yeah, Mom.
All right.
Can I get a whoop whoop? Whoop whoop. What are the observable types that we have covered today? Oh, sorry. RxJS observables or 80s observables. Got 2 seconds left.
Nice.
Good
Man,
job,
this is a smart
guys.
group. I like it.
Mom, I think that's cheating.
Pablo is catching up on you, though.
What is the difference between hot and cold observables? Somebody, you gotta beat her, guys.
We are
Observables
so smart.
Wow.
are continuously
We got
watching
this.
even
That
when
is
the test
amazing.
isn't running. Good job, guys. Okay, so tip, we gotta make it harder for NGComp. Got it.
That's why they're paying the
Making
big
up
bucks.
ground.
Hey, he's very close.
I'm not scared of
Yeah.
him.
Who's Pablo? Pablo, where's Pablo? Who is
I
Pablo?
ain't scared of Pablo.
Can I get a whoop whoop from Pablo? Who is Pablo?
Can I get a whoop whoop?
We're rooting for Pablo.
the guy that got shoved.
What does the dash mean in a marble test? Woo!
Okay.
Was that you, Josh?
No, the one person, I clicked the wrong button.
Okay, so it's a measure of time.
I got the right answer.
I think the next question might go just gonna ask.
Ah,
Who's the best 80s artist? And there is a right question, or there's a right answer, so good luck. Mom, you might lose your streak here.
No, David Bowie wrong.
Oh. we will
Well,
update
obviously
that.
that's the wrong one.
Not on there. And that is a shame.
That is a fair point. No one likes Madonna? David Bowie? That's true.
What?
Guns N' Roses is not,
Oh,
they're not an
no,
artist.
it would have been Axl Rose.
Question, let me do a clarification. I am a big Prince fan. Prince actually wrote some of the Bangles songs.
Well, you should have picked the Bengals then. Okay, Mom, still in the lead. Denny, catching up.
Oh,
Nice.
What type of observable does the subscription carrot work with?
It's getting intense. I think that's all the answers.
Yeah.
Okay.
oh, guys.
This is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Did you?
This is going to be
Can I
interesting.
get a drum roll? I get-
Oh my goodness.
Guess who's not the NGHouston organizer anymore? Okay, why won't the subscription carrot work with cold observables? This is your chance, Mom. Redeem yourself.
Oh, no. Last one.
What you talking about, Willis? I got it.
Nice.
There it is.
Different strokes, right?
That is true.
So, since Hot
Is that the end of the
observables
game?
already run. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah.
Denny just hit an answer streak of 7. How many
God
frames
dang.
are represented by one tick? Yeah! Okay, now can I get a drum roll? Yeah! So Denny won.
I can't believe he beat. Get results. Let's see what
That was the right answer.
That's what I got.
There we
All
go.
right. Awesome.
That was awesome.
Denny, see me later for your prize. Okay, so
No, like, in Poland, she's only had like,
okay, we're going with it. We have no script.
Oh, yeah.
So in this talk, we went over the. So in this, we're reviewing now. So in this
We're
talk,
almost done, guys.
we talked about the benefits of unit testing. We went over marbles and marble diagrams. And we looked at my favorite, marble syntax.
We found out about what the difference between hot and cold observables is. Went over some example marble tests. Learned about how we can override the test scheduler. Sam danced for us. And we took a quiz.
So we would like to thank the NGConf organizers, one of which is in the room, the writers of NGRX, none of which are in the room, and the Angular community, all of which are in the room.
Nice.
oh, I have
So-
a question.
But
Like
so our slides, I'm gonna skip
But
that one
she's
because
not
that is
my
not.
mom?
We're not giving that out to the public yet because this is an NGConf talk. So that's not right. That's right. There we go. So I'm the littlest dev, and Keith is Keith Stewart.
Well, the Keith Stewart.
The
That's not
Keith
right
Stewart.
either.
Oh, okay. Look down here. Ignore those. Remember, it's a test run.
Yeah.
First one. We're
You guys like making new Twitter accounts just for NGConf?
No.
I just
You changed
got that
your
wrong,
Twitter-
and I
you
changed
changed your
mine.
Twitter handle after you submitted NGConf, so your talk on this, your Twitter, on the speakers page is wrong. Guess who told me that? Stephen Flume told me that today. He's like, Sam got the wrong link on.
He looked at my Twitter. He must have tried to go to my Twitter.
He tried to look at it. Yeah, he actually offered you an internship.
What?
I'll talk about that later. Ooh. Okay,
Wow.
you guys,
That's
thank you
awesome.
very much. That was awesome. Everybody, let's give him a hand.